When you think of the country of Argentina, you think about football, soccer. That's all you think about. We're talking about Messi, Julian Alvarez, El Apache Tevez, Sergio Agüero. We never think about their politics or what the people are going through or any of that. And we definitely don't think about other sports that Argentina does well. Well, since this is a boxing channel somewhat, I'm going to talk about a sport that they do well that people ignore. Boxing. Maybe not MMA yet, but boxing they have in the past. They've had some of the biggest names in boxing. We're talking about Pascual Perez, Oscar Bonavena, and obviously Carlos Monzon. These guys became Hall of Famers. They became legends in the sport that people talk about to this day. Some of the hardest fighters were made in Argentina. You see, the Argentinian people are very hard people, very strong people, warriors. They come from a tough terrain, and they're fit for both of these sports, soccer and boxing. And they, like I said before, they've produced legends in the past. However, one thing that keeps getting me down is the current state of Argentine boxing. You see, Argentina right now has no fighters as of now coming up that are going to be a problem or challenge. I mean, their best fighter right now, pound for pound, has to be Brian Castaño. And Brian Castaño recently got slapped by Jermell Charlo. Put up a good fight the first fight, but the second fight, the rivalry's over. There's also Jeremiah Ponce, who recently lost his undefeated record against Puerto Rico's Subriel Matias. And then we have Fernando Daniel Martinez, who's in a weight class that is stacked and probably will never see a world title. So if you look at the past 70s compared to the current state of boxing in Argentina, there's a huge gap. It's a huge contrast. And I think the reason why that is because more people right now in Argentina are more invested in football, soccer. You see, they just won the World Cup, obviously. So more people are invested in the sport. The women, the young kids, the tough kids growing up there, they're all going to try to play soccer rather than boxing. So I think Argentina's going to have a few, maybe decades before they can really produce something good in boxing, because that's not where their attention's at right now. But one thing I do want to talk about is the golden era of Argentine boxing. See, when we think about the golden era, we think about Bonavena and Monzon back in the 70s. They have really tough dudes in the 70s. But I think what most boxing fans missed, because nobody really talked about it, was the golden era of Argentine boxing. It wasn't this one. It was actually from the year 2008, I would say, to about 2016-14. Very recently. But it really got no light, no shine. And the reason why I saw it was because I guess I was an amateur at that time, and we always thought the Argentinians were tough, mainly because of the fighters that were on TV, and there was a lot of them that people missed. And this got no publicity because these guys became champions at different times, and a lot of them were robbed from their titles. They were robbed from championship titles. They were robbed from championship fights. They were stripped. So none of them became champions at the same time, but around the same time. And during this era, Argentina had a lot of fighters. And it feels like it just happened yesterday. But now it's over with. But we're going to talk about those fighters that were in Argentina's golden era. It wasn't in the 70s. It was recently. And a lot of people missed it. The first fighter we're going to talk about during the golden age of Argentina's boxing is Sergio La Maravilla Martinez. Why Sergio Martinez? Because Sergio Martinez started boxing so early. Late in his life, but early in time compared to these other fighters. You see, Sergio Martinez became pro in 1997, and he's still fighting to this day. Well, he's the one that kind of got this momentum of these Argentine boxers together. He was a pillar that got this momentum started for these Argentine fighters. You see, Sergio Martinez has had a long career, and his coming out party was when he beat Paul Williams. He had an early loss to Antonio Margarito from Mexico. When he fought Paul Williams was a destroyer. Nobody could mess with him. He was tall, rangy, nonstop action, nonstop throwing punches, could take a punch, could hit pretty hard. And guys had so much to deal with when they fought Paul Williams. He was just so active. Guys couldn't get him off of him. But when he fought Sergio Martinez for the first time, the fight was very, very close. Paul Williams was on top of the world at this point, and early on he dropped Maravilla Martinez in the first round, so we thought it was going to be another Paul Williams type of fight where he just gets rid of the guy right away. But Martinez, for some reason, decided to get back up and fight back, and in that same round he ends up dropping Paul Williams, something we've never seen before. And Paul Williams had fought a lot of guys like Margarito and all of them, Carlos Quintana, Walter Matiz. When he got dropped, we knew it would be a different type of fight. We finally found a guy who can compete with Paul Williams. And the fight was a fucking banger. Fight of the year candidate, and they went to war toe-to-toe. A lot of people thought La Maravilla Martinez won that fight, but ultimately it was given to Paul Williams, which would set up a rematch. And during the waiting time for the rematch, Martinez fought Kelly Pavlik and beat him up pretty bad. Kelly Pavlik, who was a good fighter, who was a really good fighter in his time, and became champion for the WBC WBO middleweight title. Well, when he finally got a rematch against Paul Williams, he brutally knocked him out fast in 2 rounds. And that's the first time we ever saw Paul Williams lose like that. And ultimately, it was the end of his career. So this is where the momentum kind of starts for these Argentine boxers, late 2010. During that time that Maravilla Martinez was fighting Paul Williams, there was another young Argentinian kid who was coming up. His name was Diego Chavez. Now, Diego Chavez did not accomplish as much as the other guys on this video, but he was a very good, tough contender that was giving guys a lot of problems and knocking everybody out. At the time where Maravilla was coming up, he was about 15-0, and he had a good, bright future to fight a lot of fighters later on. And he did. He ended up fighting Keith Thurman when Keith Thurman was Keith Thurman. He was knocking everybody out, and it was Keith Thurman's hardest fight. It was a toe-to-toe battle. Both guys were getting hurt, and ultimately Keith Thurman stopped Diego Chavez. But that put his name on the map. And then he would fight Brandon Rios, who also had a big name at the time, in a weird disqualification loss. He fought Tim Bradley to a draw. Tim Bradley, who was a really good fighter, could even be a legend. And he went on from there to fight a little bit past his prime. But this was another guy that was coming up during that time. At the same time, south of these weight classes, 140 pounds from Chavez to 126 for Jesus Cuellar. Jesus Cuellar was writing his own story. Around those Paul Williams, Sergio Martinez fights, Jesus Cuellar was 20-1, and he became a featherweight champion a few years later in 2013, beating Claudio Marrero. And then he would defend the title multiple times, knocking out Rico Ramos, beating Puerto Rico's legend Juan Manuel Lopez brutally in 2 rounds, knocking out Victor Archinian, Armenia's GOAT. This guy was becoming a monster, and he wrote his own story. He defended his featherweight title a lot of times, and this was all happening at the same time that Chavez was fighting. So was La Maravilla Martinez. Ultimately, his downfall was that he ran into Tank Davis. So Argentina had Sergio Martinez at middleweight. They had Diego Chavez at 140, which is light welterweight. They had Jesus Cuellar at 126 featherweight, and then they had another fighter at 147 by the name of Luis Carlos El Potro Abregu, who was fighting at welterweight, 147. And during the same time where Paul Williams and them were fighting, he was up and coming. He had an early loss, Timothy Bradley, but he was still 29-1. Knocking everybody out. He was one of the punchers in his Argentine class. He ended up knocking out. He was the first one to defeat Puerto Rico's Tomas Delorme, who really ruined him for the rest of his career. This guy used to be a prospect. Abregu went out there and knocked him out as the underdog within 7 rounds, stopping him early and finishing him off at the end. And he became a WBC welterweight champion. This guy had a mean right hand over the top, but it looked like he didn't really take boxing too seriously. And ultimately, he ended up losing to Saddam Ali, having another comeback fight, and just kind of retiring from boxing. One of Argentina's most popular fighters ever was also shining during this time. We're talking about the one and only Lucas La Máquina Matisse. He was up and coming when Sergio Martinez became champion, but ultimately made his own history and became one of the most feared men at 140 pounds ever. Light welterweight. Whatever Diego Chavez wasn't doing, Matisse was doing. He had a split decision loss against Zab Judah that was very controversial, and another one against Devin Alexander. I thought he won both of them, but ultimately he got his just dues by winning the WBA light welterweight title, WBC light welterweight title. And those were against some strong opponents, like Humberto La Zorrita Soto from Mexico, a Jose from Nigeria, knocking out Mike Dallas, a prospect from the U.S. in 1 round, and beating Lamont Peterson, who was considered one of the best USA fighters at the time. His world would come crashing down when he fought Danny Garcia, but he still went on to win a few fights that were very interesting, like the Ruslan Provodnikov fight, Robert Ortiz, who was undefeated at the time, John Molina in an all-out war. And this guy became very popular. Ultimately, the wars got to him. Another fighter that was handling business during this big run was Omar Narvaez, who honestly is considered one of Argentina's best fighters ever. Omar Narvaez had a huge streak before he lost his title, his undefeated record. And during this time, he was already one of the veterans. He was fighting old like Sergio Martinez was as well. Narvaez won his title in 2002, and at the time that these guys were coming up in 2008 through 2016, he was just defending his title nonstop in the flyweight division. I mean, Narvaez probably has like somewhere around 10, 12 defenses. He also became a junior bantamweight title holder along with the flyweight title. He ultimately lost to Nonito Onaire by trying to go up in weight class and beating him, but it was still a very boring fight that he made Nonito look bad in. He continued to go a long way after that. He fought a few more years up until 2014. That fight happened in 2011, and he didn't lose another fight until he fought the monster Naoya Inoue, who was much bigger, in 2014. That was probably his swan song, Naoya Inoue, which is nothing to be ashamed of. This guy's a monster, no pun intended. Then he went on to win a few more fights and ultimately retired in 2019 at the age of 43. But this is one of Argentina's best fighters ever that was handling business during the time that all these fighters were fighting. Like I said, this is a golden age for a reason. He will go down in history. And while all this was going down, all these fighters were making heat throughout boxing, there was another fighter, and probably the most popular fighter in Argentine history. We're talking about El Chino Marcos Maidana. Chino Maidana was 25-0 when he came out to the United States. He ended up fighting Kotelnik in 2009 in a close decision. He lost. Then he was going to be fed to Victor Ortiz as Team Ortiz thought they could take him out and make him look good. But he turned the tide, ended up knocking out Ortiz, made him quit and ruin his career in 6 rounds. This was around the same time that Narvaez and Martinez knocked out Paul Williams. And this guy just went on a tear from there, knocking out Victor Cayo, Marcus Corley, and exposing Amir Khan in a close decision, almost winning the WBA super lightweight title. From there, he had a few classics with Eric Morales, Peter Petrov. He lost a bad decision to Devin Alexander, but that wasn't the end of Chino. Chino came back. He started working with Robert Garcia, and it was a different type of fighter that ended up fighting Mayweather. In 2012, he fought Jesus Soto Caraz, a Mexican brawler that he was able to knock out in spectacular fashion, and we saw the work that Robert Garcia did with this guy. This guy just needed a trainer from the beginning, and if he would have had a good one, he would have gone further than Monzon. He ended up fighting Josito Lopez, knocking him out. He ended up beating Adrian Broner, taking his O, and also ruining his career. And then he would fight a close fight with Floyd Mayweather Jr., where he was able to crack him a few times. The fight was very, very close. And then he fought a second fight with Mayweather, and this time Mayweather had figured him out, and that was his swan song. And it's not a bad one. This is probably one of the best fighters ever. Him or Narvaez and Martinez out of all the Argentine boxers. But like I said, the point of this video was to tell you how many fighters were making waves during this time. This was a golden era for Argentine boxing. Some of them fought the best, like Pacquiao and Mayweather, Miguel Cotto. Some of them won, some of them lost. But Argentina's boxing, I don't think we'll ever see days like this, especially right now. I just don't see it. But these guys came from the same school. They had competed with each other in the amateurs. Whoever was in charge of this program was doing the right thing, because I've never seen so many fighters from one country make so much heat at once. But anyways, that was golden era of Argentine boxing. If you want to tell me about other fighters that were in the era, tell me in the comments, and we'll talk about it. Have a good one.